and welcome to the Sidcourse. Like discourse, but my name is Sid. Ask 1,000 people what their favourite game was growing up, and you'll find that Final Fantasy VII comes up more than once. A game that's cemented in the halls of gaming history. The announcement of a remake brought on a wave of excitement, concern, and intrigue from fans all over the world. Now, after more than 2 decades, the remake of a classic title that arguably defined a generation of players has been released, and there's plenty to discuss. From the criticisms and intrigue of the ending, praise for technical and narrative achievements, as well as a disquiet for its future. In this episode of the Sidcourse, we're going to take a step back and look at the concept of memory, replayability, and shared nostalgia with Final Fantasy VII Remake. If you haven't already played Final Fantasy VII Remake or the original, the video contains spoilers that may affect your enjoyment of the games. As a precaution, I'd recommend playing the games or watching the gameplay before continuing on with this episode. The growth and development of a child is a tumultuous one. Any new parent would tell you the stresses and worry that comes with how to raise these tiny little people. They learn from everything around them, the people they speak to, the other children that they hang out with, the lessons they learn, and of course, the media they consume. The interactions with our environment are how we learn to navigate the world. And in this modern space that we live in, part of that development and learning comes from books, television, film, and video games. And every once in a while, we find something, whether it's a toy or a book, a film or a show, a person or thing, something becomes our favorite. But what makes something our favorite?
Growing up, my favorite game was Ocarina of Time. It's like the first game I remember playing that was just so extensive. Before that, I mean, the earliest games I probably played were Super Mario Land and just anything in the Mario franchise. But I remember my brother renting Ocarina of Time from Blockbuster, and at that point of our life, pretty much you'd rent a game from Blockbuster and beat it and return it. But with Ocarina of Time, it's like we barely were able to scratch the surface with it. So just, and granted now I look back, I'm like, oh, that's not that long of a game. There's not that much to it, but for my little child brain, it was so massive and magical in a way I had never seen before.
I guess like a lot of kids, I had a lot of favorite games, but the one I always sort of stuck to and would always come around back and be like, yes, this is actually my favorite game, was Star Fox 64, or as we called it in Australia, Lilac Wars. I was living in a cul-de-sac, very cliche neighborhood style, and me and all the other kids in the cul-de-sac would play games together, and that was kind of the only one that we could all pass off, just sit around and play and kind of finish in an afternoon, whereas like the other games we had were Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask, which we couldn't do that with, so we always sort of just ended up by playing Star Fox.
Growing up, my favorite game would probably be Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, because that was just like I've played that a lot over the years. It was a big part of my childhood. Link's Awakening was the first game that was like mine. My family had a couple of game systems, but I received a bundle of a Game Boy Pocket with Link's Awakening for holidays from my grandmother. So that was like the first thing that was mine and mine alone. It was it had that personal connection just due to being a gift from a loved one, and also being the first sort of like aspect of ownership and control over that.
My favorite video game was Animal Crossing Wild World. I think I played it first when I was around 11 or 12. And for me, it was like really important because of the freedom that it offered me in the game world. At that age, you don't have a lot of freedom. So having like your own little town and your own house and people animals you can interact with was just like, it was a whole other level. It was my own like safe space away from the real world.
My favourite video game growing up was Final Fantasy VIII. It was the first that really kind of spoke to me, first video game that I really felt a part of the world. I was a big reader of books, and this was the first one that really felt like a novel to me, except I kind of got to be a part of it. I got to assume the role of the characters, and the world was just so fully realized, I feel, and it was the first that really captured my imagination. It was Final Fantasy VIII.
Growing up, I'd have to say my favorite video game would have to be Majora's Mask. I don't know why, but I really loved the tone of the game because it was so different from every other Zelda game made. Maybe aside from Twilight Princess, but I was going through a really rough time then, and it just kind of appealed to me. I found it through a Chugga Conroy video series, and I just kind of fell in love with it.
Yeah, growing up, my favorite game was BioShock, the first one. I think it was kind of the first game that made me look at games, like, seriously, that made me think about them. I was probably 10 years old when I played it for the first time, I think. No, it came out, 2007? So I was 12? It was my first real, first-person shooter kind of game. Up until that point, everything was kind of like third-person platformers, 2D platformers, the stuff that kids play, Diddy Kong Racing, that sort of thing. I played the demo for it on Xbox 360, and I think I played it 7 times before I even played the actual game. I was just so enamored by the opening to the game, but also I just fell in love with the aesthetic, the visuals, the effects, the combat even. So much of it was just so poignant. I remember just playing it the first time. I remember in my head right now thinking about it, what it felt like when you finished the first cutscene and came out of the water, and how I just kind of sat there and did nothing. Man, yeah, good game.
For some people growing up, playing through a game and being lost in a story that captures your imagination gives you that attachment. Others that I spoke to discussed how the challenge and sense of accomplishment are what compelled them to that particular title. In some cases, where it came from was what defined that bond. All reasonings, equally valid, help our development when we're children, and it's through these experiences in life, including the media that we consume and the time at which we include them into our lives, that help shape and define who we are. And this happens through memories. Our brains are not a library that we can walk through and pick out a memory at will. Instead, they're a result of synaptic interactions through neurons. The initial firing of a neuron makes the synapse more sensitive to similar signals. This is how short-term memories, such as hearing the name of someone for the first time, is formed. Through repetition, the synapse is strengthened. As time goes on, that sensitivity is prone to wear out. For the brain to form long-term memories, the synapse must be strengthened permanently. That is, it must remain sensitive to or familiar with the particular neural firing patterns. This results in a permanent memory trace, a pathway that is followed. When it comes to complex memories, these patterns are formed over large areas of the brain with multiple patterns over subsequent signals. So, when a familiar signal, whether it's a person's name, a color, a melody perhaps, our brain facilitates the communication to other neurons and begins responding with firing patterns. Our brains don't retrieve memories, they are in fact recreated in real time by complex neural activity using existing trace pathways. There is a part of the brain called the amygdala, and it specializes in forming long-term memory. Specifically, it's connected to human emotion, and it influences the encoding and storage of hippocampal-dependent episodic memories. Emotional events as memories are often more vivid and persistent than those acquired through mere repetition. Within the amygdala, when a person is aroused through emotion, this aids in strengthening the synapses and forming these long-term memories. Most commonly, fear is the stimulus that creates these memories. But it's not unheard of that we're aroused from joy, sadness, disgust, or anger. It's often suggested that these events tagged by the amygdala as emotionally significant will receive priority in memory encoding. When it comes to video games, or any other media for that matter, we're primarily consuming it for the entertainment value. However, the other factors in our daily lives have an impact on those activities. Our favorite games sometimes aren't the first games we play. They may not even be the standout titles that deserve high praise. However, it is the time and place in which we played them that earns the spot. For some players, perhaps those with difficult childhoods or upbringings, games were sometimes an escape from their woes. And of course, some had a group of friends that they'd play with, creating memories of joy and solace together. I believe that it would be safe to assume that 1997's Final Fantasy VII is iconic, in the way that Ubisoft wishes that Aiden Pierce's hat was iconic. As the game that brought Japanese role-playing games to Western audiences, it was a landmark moment for video games. Spanning across 3 discs on the original PlayStation, it resonated with a generation of players. The never-before-seen cinematic story, memorable characters, and engrossing score were all part of this experience. What's interesting about the world that we live in is that collectively, there is some kind of conscious understanding as part of the culture. People who haven't played the original Final Fantasy VII, or even many games ever, have some kind of faint knowledge and understanding of what it is to various degrees.
I played Final Fantasy VII actually very early in my life. I think it must have been when it just came out, so I would have been 7 or 8 years old. My dad picked me up and he lived a couple of hours out at this point, and he picked me up for an overnight or 2 nights, a weekend. And when I got there, he had the PlayStation and he went out and rented a game for me, game and a pizza. And the game he rented was Final Fantasy VII. And I remember playing the opening bombing section and having no idea what was going on. I was learning to read at this point. Final Fantasy VII, it opens real fast. It opens real heavy as you're this like eco-terrorist group trying to blow up this power plant. I had no idea what was going on, and then I get to the Scorpion boss and somehow I managed to beat that. Then there's a countdown timer and you got 20 minutes to like get out of there before it explodes, and it was a stressful situation for a 7-year-old that didn't know what was going on. But I was like, okay, cool. I had something to do at Dad's. It wasn't until years later, after I had discovered Final Fantasy VIII, that I went back to 7, and I was like, this is that game. This is that one that I played at Dad's house that one weekend. I was very open to it because I was so in love with the series at this point through Final Fantasy VIII. That I was willing to like give it another go and like see how it holds up on its own.
So I have never personally played the original Final Fantasy VII, but my sister has, and I have watched her play some of it, like when I was really young. I don't know why she was playing it way back when I was like 4, considering that like I'm pretty sure like Final Fantasy XII was out at that time, but I think she was going through all of the Final Fantasies again. And while I've never played the original, I do know a little bit about it, but like I never got like the full plot of it. So like playing through the remake now, I'm kind of like shocked of what I'm experiencing. Like I would watch videos and people would use clips from the original game. So I learned about very like specific parts of the game. I remember seeing the part right after you beat the Airbuster, actually, where Cloud falls off a bridge and then lands in the flower bed by Aerith. I've seen that original clip. I've seen the clip where he cross-dresses to get into some club. Stuff like that. I've seen very like random parts of the game. I've just never seen like the beginning of it, the middle of it, or the ending of it.
I think the general understanding and then the cultural impact it's had is obviously, you know, it's highly renowned as one of the greatest games of all time. People have adored it since its release, and you know, obviously it's not a perfect game, and it's easier to see that now, looking back and playing something like that. But it just did a lot that nothing had really done before. And it did it on this scale that I think just was impressive to most people. It told a story that felt adult-like, and I think there are certain aspects of it that are, I guess. But in a way, it told it in a way that was easy to comprehend for younger people. You know, granted, there are twists and turns in it that are weird and don't fully make sense even under a microscope, or I don't want to say don't make sense, but are kind of convoluted in general. But I think the overall sense of like what the world is and what the characters want made enough sense where it was easy to latch onto for anyone, and felt at the time more I guess mature than other games. Whether or not that's true is hard to determine, but it felt that way. I think it was probably a lot of people's first Final Fantasy game, and I think it is probably the standard by which most people compare any other Final Fantasy game to.
Yeah, there are elements of it that I think just through the cultural zeitgeist of, the internet, everyone kind of knows, certain character deaths, certain moments throughout the game, controversial, outfits and looks of certain characters. I don't want to say anything because I don't know. I don't want to spoil it for anyone either. But, that sort of thing always makes me think on those elements, I guess, like there are parts of it that I understand, again, through what I've seen in videos. But the thing that I think gives me a better understanding of Final Fantasy is probably the music more than anything else. Because I have not played Final Fantasy VII, but I also haven't really played any Final Fantasy games all the way to the end outside of 15, 1, and 2. Not exactly the greatest benchmarks for the series.
The most current equivalent, to draw a comparison, would be the Marvel Cinematic Universe. People who haven't watched any of the films have an awareness of its existence and can recognize the likes of Iron Man, Thor, or Captain America. The same can be said for the likes of Final Fantasy. There's a distinct language that the brand as a whole has that anyone, fans or non-fans, can gather and sense the DNA. For players who haven't ever experienced Final Fantasy VII, they know of its legacy in game's history and its cultural impact. We all know of and recognize Cloud, Tifa, Barret, Aerith, Sephiroth, and the Buster Sword. We know that Aerith's demise is one of gaming's most crucial storytelling moments. We know about the painted backgrounds, the goofy character models, and that incredible soundtrack. The prelude and victory sounds are all part of us. In one way or another, we've all experienced the game. For my wife growing up, it was her favorite game. Having 3 older brothers, all of whom played a plethora of games on all of the consoles, she'd watch and play alongside them. She was 6 or 7 at the time the game was released. Her first experience of the game was sitting beside her brother as they went through the game together, spending countless hours in the story of the spiky-haired mercenary and his friends in an adventure to save the world. Over the years, she ended up playing 7 on more than one occasion. Perhaps it's the generation of players that grew up in the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation era as their first console. But I noticed that she wasn't alone in returning back to a favorite game throughout her life. An interesting point of discussion when it comes to video games is replayability. Most forms of media and entertainment are relatively easy to play. You can rewatch TV shows and films. You can listen to the same song or album on repeat. And of course, we can replay a video game. When it comes to games, there are so many different methods and pathways one can take. I guess it's part of creating additional value for the player. Games with a more linear experience, like a film or book, allow you to be taken back through the game just as you did the first time. Entire communities are dedicated to speedrunning and self-imposed challenge in order to make the game more challenging or unique. Often, you'll find that games come with branching narratives, creating different outcomes for the player to experience. Good endings, bad endings, even alternative cutscenes allow players to play the game with alternative choices to make it worth their while. Games with more open-ended experiences, especially sandbox games, offer variations in methods to how the player can replay it. From the likes of Metal Gear Solid 5, where you have free reign to play stealthy or use the full arsenal at your disposal, to the open-world RPGs, like The Witcher 3, where you can explore and pursue missions as and when you please. Or even the likes of Minecraft or Terraria, where the world is randomized every time and everything is craftable to your liking. In the conversations that I had when discussing replaying favorite games, many reasons came up.
So one of the bigger life moments, I would say, that I have come back to Link's Awakening was a few years ago. My grandmother, the one who actually gave me the gift where I received Link's Awakening, passed away. And it had always been an important game to me, just because it was the first one that I owned, as well as the story and themes within the game really resonated with me. So after she passed, I went back to that to just sort of go back to that time period when I was a kid and had received that. Just sort of re-experience that sort of time period, re-experience that story, the way it affected me personally, and just sort of that feeling of connection. I would say that going back and replaying that helped. If you've ever played Link's Awakening and paid attention to the story going through, it deals a lot with concepts such as loss, not really knowing how or whether to move forward. So especially going through it again, a lot of those themes really resonated after dealing with my relative passing.
I feel like when you replay a game, you kind of get that sense of that feeling that you had when you originally played a game. It's like, this is going to be a bad comparison, but imagine smoking for a long time and then you stop and then you start smoking again. Well, you start to feel good again because you get that nicotine and you're like, oh wow, I'm getting that rush. Or it's like drugs where you take it for a long time and then you stop and then you try it again and you get the same rushing, great feeling. I kind of feel like that's how nostalgia is. And playing games again is just, you get that overwhelming sense of, wow, this game was really great. I'm so glad I'm playing it again. And you just get that rush of a high off of playing that game again.
In general, a really stressful time for me was the beginning of college. I went off to a school that was far away from where I grew up, didn't have a lot of friends in the area, and I definitely struggled a fair bit to adjust at that point. So in that range of time, those first couple months, I just did a bunch of stuff that reminded me of what life was like in the past, and one of those things I did start up Ocarina of Time again, kind of like as a comfort food thing, which actually worked to my benefit because when you live in a college dorm, other people are like, oh, what are you playing? Everyone at that point had played Ocarina of Time, so it was an easy conversation starter.
Players everywhere enjoy replaying games for multiple reasons. Staying with something familiar creates a sense of ease that can help in times of stress or anxiety, returning to the signal that created those memories of comfort for a moment of nostalgia. Using nostalgia in modern media, whether it's films, games, television, or any other medium, isn't new. To a certain extent, it could be argued that corporations have come to weaponize it as a means of guaranteeing sales, using something from the past and giving it a prequel, sequel, remake, reboot, or remaster to align it to modern standards. In the world of filmmaking, reboots are prevalent, established franchises and properties getting brand new versions of films from decades ago. Extensions of existing films in the forms of prequels and sequels are also prevalent. Most notably, the Star Wars franchise has become a significant tentpole in the Disney pipeline, with the sequel trilogy using nostalgia at every possible moment to bring in the sales. In recent years, we've had a number of these updates to well-loved titles in the world of video games. It's not uncommon for a property to be brought back in glorious high definition or 4K to run on modern systems. And from the perspective of a business, why not? A large group of people already have an association with the title. They have the synaptic imprint in their brains that they associated with their childhood. These people are now older, possibly more stressed, and hopefully more affluent, thus more likely to purchase something they already know of and recognize, than something new that they need to invest themselves in. And ultimately, that's the key word. Investment. Not just a time investment or a financial one, but an emotional one. If you grew up with video games, those titles meant something to you. The stories they told, the mechanics they taught, it became a part of you. And as you enter adulthood, new things become harder to involve yourself in. Time is against you. The obligations of reality with family, friends, employment, health, and mental well-being are your priorities, and the things you enjoy take a back seat. It's why watching reruns of sitcoms are more comfortable to enjoy at a whim than jumping into a new show. It's why rewatching a film that's just started broadcasting is more accessible to slip into than choosing something new. It's why replaying a tried and tested game is more relaxing than playing something you know nothing about. There is a comfort to be found in the familiar, and that's why it's so easy to exploit from a corporate perspective. You've already played this game before. Why not buy it again? Play it once more with shiny new graphics and music on your new television. See all the latest improvements with your new graphics card. What do you have to lose? You can trust what you know, right? There is a psychology to nostalgia and why it works. Research conducted by the University of Southampton found that it can be good for you when it comes to counteracting loneliness, boredom, and anxiety through conjuring up positive emotions from long-term memories. As we discussed earlier, when it comes to memory, it's not just about what's formed, but the way that they were created. Professor of Psychology Claire Routledge at the North Dakota State University says that memory is how we bring meaning to our lives. Nostalgia can be seen as part of the bigger story of how emotions get stored in our memories. There is a link between emotions and memory. During times of discomfort or trauma, our brains seek that comfort. Sometimes we actively seek the trigger or signal to kickstart that synaptic sequence of something that can release that dopamine hit that we desperately need.
If I'm feeling like stressed or anxious or anything like that, I don't generally play new games. A new game would stress me out even more. I remember I bought Outer Wilds to play in that state, and I was like, nope, I'm stressed, and I went back to play. I think I literally went back and played Star Fox 64 instead. The way I like to explain why I play Star Fox when I'm like stressed or anxious is I know that game inside and out, like the back of my hand. And when I'm in like, you know, a low state, I like to be able to be like fully in control of something, and I can be fully in control of that game and actually feel like I'm accomplishing something when replaying it. And the same goes for like a handful of other games like Majora's Mask or Super Mario 64 or Pokemon Gold and Silver or something, but Star Fox 64 is the main one where I'm like, yep, I can do this. No worries, easy.
For my wife, she had a similar story. Having watched her older brother play the original when she was a child, playing it herself as a teenager in high school and again as she was at university, her repeat playthroughs came at points in her life of difficulty and stress, times where she felt alienated and alone. A part of her was drawn back to that time, one that was simpler. A time where she and her brother were playing through the game and that familiar comfort of love and care came flooding back. In the original story of Final Fantasy VII, there's a point in the game that's considered the big twist of the story. Throughout the game, you play as Cloud Strife, the protagonist, whose prior occupation was a first-class soldier in the private military for Shinra Corporation. You play throughout the game with the knowledge that you're an elite warrior who's forging their own future now as a mercenary. Except, the twist of the game is that Cloud isn't that person. Cloud is a nobody. He failed to pass the test to become part of Soldier and was just a regular grunt. In fact, you play as the person who befriended the true hero, Zack Fair. Following an incident or two, Zack dies in battle and Cloud's psyche breaks. His processing of the trauma ends with him carrying Zack's sword, role, and legacy as a means to process it all, taking the accomplishments of someone else as his own. There are some parallels that can be drawn between the concept of memory and Cloud. On the one hand, it could be interpreted that Cloud's use of the Buster Sword, the iconic weapon that he carries throughout the promotional art and cutscenes, is something he attaches to, in the same way that we attach ourselves to games, films, music, and anything else that takes us back to a memory or place. For him, it's part of his coping mechanism. Cloud Strife carries the sword of his friend and mentor, a true hero. Perhaps, deep down in his subconscious, the memories of that time with him resurface and brings him back to a place without stress, without anxiety, without hurt. It brings him strength enough to save him and his friends. We replay our favorite games, returning to the worlds and stories that we love. Deep in our subconscious, the memories of that time resurface and bring us back to a place without stress, without anxiety, and without hurt. It brings us strength, even if it's fleeting, and sometimes it saves us. 2020's Final Fantasy VII Remake isn't the first game to be remade from the ground up for modern audiences. Resident Evil has begun updating the earlier entries in their franchise with the releases of Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, as have the first two Yakuza games and the Spyro and Crash Bandicoot games too. Final Fantasy VII Remake, however, had a strange place in the cultural zeitgeist. The original has always been known to have these goofy character models and inadequate translations. The story, though loved, takes the player on a wild ride around the world. For those of us who played the original and were fans of it in our childhoods, it has a special place in our hearts. And in 2005, a technical demo was presented at the announcement of the PlayStation 3, one that sparked the hopes and dreams of fans everywhere. With this short teaser of what was possible on the technology of this new console, came a somewhat unspoken promise that a remake could be on the horizon. However, it was used as a means for the development team behind Final Fantasy XIII to move on to the PS3 platform, and all that was left were rumors. And then, at E3 2015, the announcement for Final Fantasy VII Remake was announced. This short trailer had a lot of hidden messages, as many theorists online will tell you, but the immediate reaction from players was excitement. It was to be a promise fulfilled. Of course, it didn't come without scrutiny. The details that were released over the years following the official announcement had many players skeptical. Many weren't fans of Nomura with his work on Kingdom Hearts. Some were concerned at how real-time combat would work in this game considering the previous Final Fantasy installments. The trailers that came capitalized on the nostalgia, as any good marketing team would, using the reimagined music that sends the synaptic sequences into overdrive. And then, the game released.
So from what I've played of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I think so far I'm confused by a lot of stuff that was not in the original. As I guess what you expect from a remake, right, is a mostly, not one-to-one, but, better graphics and the same story, maybe told in a slightly different way. But already in the first half, there are certain departures and changes that I'm entirely confused about and don't know how they relate to the original yet, which frankly I kind of like, because that sense of being like, what the fuck is going on, is kind of a fun one. And I think as far as remakes that I've played before, you get what you think you're gonna get, and that's fine and sometimes great, but I think so far from what I've seen, it's trying something a little different and changing part of the DNA, and I don't know how that'll pay off yet, and I don't even know if it'll pay off in this game because there's going to be multiple parts to it, but it's definitely been interesting.
Yeah, so I played the Final Fantasy Remake when it came out, and my final opinion is that it's a good game, but I don't really like to compare it too much to the original. Which is funny to say because it's a remake, so surely you should take the original into consideration, which is true. But the story in the original is, well, obviously the full story, and in the remake it's just like the tiniest part of the entire thing. So for what it does cover, I think it does really well, because there's certain characters like Jessie, for example, who I barely remember in the original. But in this, she's given so much more personality and attention. And so when she dies, it has so much more weight. It's just more emotional. Like when she passed away in the original game, I didn't really bat an eyelid. Like she just, because you don't get to spend that much time with her. But in this, there's just so much more background to a lot of the characters in general. And I mean, it's obviously it wasn't really possible at the time, but just the inclusion of facial expressions and voice acting can really add just another layer of expression, and it gives so much more character to these people. So
on the day of its release, my wife and I sat down and spent the long weekend taking a trip back to Midgar. From a wholly aesthetic and oral perspective, Final Fantasy VII Remake accomplishes something incredible, bringing to life the painted world of the original and translating the original vision in one of the best-looking games released thus far. There is an abundance of games today that aim to achieve this level of hyper-real fidelity in its character models and environments, and as a technical feat, it's impressive. However, it does lead to an overwhelming amount of games that lack any distinct style outside of modern video game look. 7 Remake counters this by leaning heavily into its anime-inspired heritage with that same modern realism. This direction lends itself into an aesthetic that has some longevity to it. It's strange to think, but at some undetermined point in the future, there will come a time where the graphics of games like Uncharted 4, God of War, and The Last of Us Part 2 will be outdated in comparison to whatever the future holds. Time has proven that even games that were cornerstones of graphical fidelity and realism are dated now. It goes without saying, the original soundtrack composed by Nobuo Uematsu is incredible. Limited to the sound chip on board the original PlayStation, Uematsu, like his peers before him, managed to create music and sound effects that are memorable, capture this moment. In this retelling of the Final Fantasy VII story, as expected, it is incredible to experience. Many players have experienced the orchestral renditions imbued with the rock sensibilities of the soundtrack and live performances of the music from the Final Fantasy series. Still, there's something about being in the world with this rearrangement of the music that brings a whole new level of immersion and wonder to the experience. You'll find that many reviews have noted the extended time length of a small portion of the game, notably the expansion of the characters and lore of the world. Characters that had a minimal presence in the original now have a place and purpose in the world, fully realized, with backstories, hopes, and ambitions of their own. It makes the events of the story more heartwarming, and eventually, tragic. With all the praise attributed, there is plenty to criticize about the remake, most notably the game's pacing. Many of the most critical points in the game come at breakneck speed, hurtling the player through one section after the other in intense boss and mini-boss fights one after the other, and on the polar opposite end of the spectrum, the pace of the story comes to a crawl. Sections of the game are spent sluggishly traversing through locations you've been through before. There were plenty of occasions that I just wanted it all just to be a cutscene, so I didn't have to slog through more gratuitous corridors and encounters with small enemies that were damage sponges. It was interesting to see that side quests were only available at specific points, primarily to service the very distinct and determined plot that exists. Some of the optional missions are interesting to play out, giving the world some further depth, But on the other hand, it felt there weren't enough, but somehow at the same time, they felt like there were too many that dragged on a little too long. For new players, there's a lot missing to the context of the characters, who they are and their motives, and without some further in-depth knowledge of the original game or its spin-off games and films, it's not particularly easy to get the whole message. The remake has plenty of complaints, from its overly long animations for fundamental interactions, long corridors, and the janky mini-games that are used to pad out the game, and depending on your view on nostalgia, its existence itself is one that can be questioned, which brings into question its ending.
So, because I had knowledge, obviously, of the original story, the ending, I honestly liked it, because it's now taken the game in a different direction, and I don't know what to expect anymore. I wouldn't say that the original story had to be improved upon, because I thought it was brilliant, but it's nice seeing that it can be taken, like I said, in a different direction and just have a kind of fresh and exciting perspective, even for players who are super familiar with the game, the original game. And that's why I'm excited to see the future parts, not just to see places like Nibelheim and Calm being reimagined in these amazing graphics, but just to see how the story can be different.
As you play through the game, it's easy to fall into the wonder of the world. However, as you're playing, you'll find things to be, for lack of a better word, off. Things aren't entirely like the original. There are plenty of hints in the way that certain characters appear and talk throughout that culminate in a finale that changes almost everything. My wife's immediate reaction was that of disdain and upset because of the deviation from the original storyline. But after some time, we spoke again about what this all meant in the grand scheme of things. There are plenty of interpretations and theories on where the game and its story goes from here. The most common understanding is that the whispers appearing throughout the game are a meta-representation of the player, more specifically, the fans of the original. As mentioned earlier, the original is ingrained in the cultural consciousness. With the amount of time passed since 1997, there are so many ways that the game could have gone wrong. Creating an exact replica of the original puts the developers in a precarious position, where they're following the script and beats and ultimately creating an experience that could just be replayed by playing the original. Veering into a completely different direction creates the likelihood that players will reject the diversion from what is already known. There is an unprecedented amount of cultural and emotional weight that comes with the release of this remake. In this retelling, the developers took the exciting take in going for a meta-reading, with the Whispers and to a certain extent Aerith playing the role of fans of the original. Throughout the game, the Whispers force the player to stay on the course of the original. The expectations of fate have already determined where destiny demands. But then, at the end, Cloud's role as that of the player, both old and new, must literally fight and destroy a determined destiny that fans were already attached to. Earlier on, I shared with you a couple of parallels between nostalgia and Final Fantasy VII. There is another one that I felt whilst playing through Remake. I'm not sure if anyone else can relate, but I'd like to share with you in some personal self-reflection. It was back in 1998 or 99, where I was around 10 years old. My sisters and I were all at our uncle's house. My cousins also had a PlayStation, and between watching Disney VHSs and playing make-believe, we'd all boot up some game on my uncle's PlayStation to pass the summer days by. One of the games in the stash had a white cover with the words Final Fantasy VII. There wasn't anything else to indicate what this game was, but we were fascinated. Like millions of others around the world, my sisters and my cousins and I, 6 of us all together, we booted up the PlayStation with the disc inside, and we began our journey into Midgar. We got off the train, fought soldiers and dog-like creatures. We were lectured by Barrett about Mako, the terror of Shinra, fought against this giant robot scorpion, and then we turned the PlayStation off. And that's it. Over the years, I've read plenty in magazines, and when the internet came along, news sites and blogs about each of the Final Fantasy games, watching videos on the history and story summaries, buying all the games in the series on the Steam and PlayStation stores. It's strange. I have this connection to a game through second and third-hand sources. Friends, colleagues, and my spouse all have had these experiences with this game, as well as other titles. Games that I had a knowledge and understanding of, that I haven't personally experienced. This indirect method of knowing the game through anecdotes, video essays, and wikis gave me an odd and jarred view of the game. There was always an intention to play through it at least once, but because of its dated mechanics and that JRPGs weren't something I was particularly interested in as a genre, it's always sat in my libraries with every other Final Fantasy game. I always thought that, through these external sources, I already had. And as my wife and I played through Remake together, I had the flashbacks to the moments in the game. Memories of moments, characters, and locations in the game came to me. I came in thinking, I knew what I was doing. I know this story, how it plays out. I've spent years with the knowledge of the game and its world, but I didn't. Not really. These memories aren't mine. My nostalgia was someone else's. And that's my parallel to Cloud's experience in Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's that we're both frauds to an extent, where he takes on the role of an ex-soldier. I was the player who took on the part of someone who knew the story and was a fan. There's something about this game that resonates. Even though it's ultimately this goofy game that has an incredible amount of ridiculousness and melodrama, it comes with a charm and wonder. It's a wonder that brought millions of players around the world together. For all those people playing decades ago, the phenomenon that it brought to those young, impressionable minds had an enormous impact. Not just from an individual emotional perspective, but from a cultural one too. This game and its story traverse through the synapses of society and culture itself, to a point where we all have some memory of this game.
The way I kind of see it is like, you've got all these friends that you used to have, or people that you used to know and weren't necessarily friends with, and you look back and you just like wanted to get to know them a little bit better. Like you thought they were really cool, but you never took that opportunity to be friends with them. And in a way, the Final Fantasy VII Remake kind of feels like that to me, where there's this cast of characters and like I knew them and I liked them. But this is an opportunity to just kind of go back and get to know them more.
And if there's one thing that Remake does well, beside its soundtrack and graphics and combat system, it's how it recaptures that original wonder. As someone new to the world, I've been drawn in, the same way that my wife was back in 1997. I can't enjoy the original the way she does. The story has been spoiled, as have I, with the fruits of modern game design and technology. Playing through this game, my wife got to share something special with someone she loves. Nostalgia, as we discussed earlier, can be a tool to take us back to a place of comfort when we need it most, tapping into the emotions and memories to let us have that moment again. But that's the thing about nostalgia. You can't really go back. The same can be said for Final Fantasy VII Remake. We can't go back to 1997 and just update what's there. There's too much at stake. There are so many emotions and memories that come from the original that a simple recreation would undoubtedly be disappointing. For many players returning to Gaia, home of Midgar, Nibelheim and Wutai, a retread into that world was always possible by going back to the original. Final Fantasy VII Remake accomplishes something that I don't think has ever been done before. Instead of just taking us back into this world, it engages us and draws us in to recapture that original wonder. The conclusion to this release, our heroes have any and all possibilities ahead of them. The playing field for what could and will happen is now even for old and new fans alike. That sense of wonder, one that can't be obtained from just playing the original, is possible as we all wait for the next parts of this game. There is a possibility that everything could go sour. Development hell isn't something that the developers are immune to. Bad story decisions could creep in. For all that we know, the sequels to this requel may be the worst games ever, but we all get to truly experience this game for the first time, once again. No one is sure as to what the future of Final Fantasy VII holds. One thing that I know for certainty, Final Fantasy VII Remake is not retelling the same thing again for the sake of bringing a classic story to a modern audience. It's not just a recreation of my wife's favorite game. It's a journey that fans new and old alike, including my wife, are remaking together for the first time. And this time, I get to join her. for watching. I'd love to know your thoughts on Remake and what you think the future for the series holds in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this episode, please do leave a rating. You can find me on Patreon, Twitter, and Discord in the links below. And if you'd like to see more episodes of the Sidcourse, please subscribe. Stay sexy.